that joke is only funny if you know what the title is, because I don't know, BetterHelp can sponsor me. I don't know if I subscribe to that mentality, but here we are anyway. And it's been a hot minute. If I could stutter like 8 more times as I start this, that would be really cool. I hope I continue doing that. See, did it again. Anyway, it's been a minute since I've recorded. However, I did the math. A while ago when I took my like last little break, I said like my brain needs to like do an episode per week that I've been doing this. I've been doing this since January of this year, right? And that's when I published episode 1 was in, January-ish, end of December. And so far, this is episode 11 and there's only been 12 weeks of the year. So honestly, I'm not even that far behind for anyone else keeping track because I know all of you listeners are waiting with bated breath for me to release a new episode. So, here we are. And today, and I'm gonna let me take a breath because I got to get back into podcast mode. I've been in like not podcast mode for a long time. And this actually, I just realized that I'm wearing a really good shirt for the vibe for today. My shirt, for those of you who are just listening, it says "Keep Going" on it, and it's from this company that does a lot of like self care and self care advocacy. And on the back, there's like 100 reasons like why you should keep going and why you shouldn't basically, commit suicide and give into those negative kind of thoughts, right? And it's a really cool company, really cool t-shirt, and I think I got it I don't remember when I got it, but a long time ago. I like to wear it to the airport because it gives people something to read while they're standing in line behind me. And every time I've worn this to the airport, I always have a conversation about it. So, advocacy starts at home or at the airport, I guess. For today, what I wanted to talk about is something that is definitely going to get a little bit personal just with like where my journey is at right now and what I've been doing. So I'm going to start with like a little bit of like a background as to like where I've been and why I've been taking a break. Like I said, because again, you all care super much. You all care a lot. Super much is what I was about to say for those of you who are listening very intently. So you can tell I've been practicing. Anyway, where we're at today is I do want to talk about kind of this idea of teachers needing therapy. Okay. And I'm starting off like kind of lighthearted because I don't know where this is going to be, but I also want to destigmatize this idea of therapy in general, right? So why I've taken a break for the past little bit is one, like the world that I've been living in between like being a full-time teacher, full-time grad student, like full-time assistant coach for all these different things, and just like being a full-time person has eventually taken its toll and determined that I needed a break. And it's not that I don't enjoy doing this, right? It's not that I don't enjoy like coming on here and talking about things, because I do. Like that's still very much something that I'm taking the time for. But it gets to a point where I just like didn't have the energy, like the mental capacity to like come on here after like a long week or after a long day of class where, things have been like a little bit harder than usual lately for sure, and a little bit more busy than usual for sure. And I've hit more like personal struggles and walls than I have in this probably whole school year for sure. But, you know, at the end of it, I do find value here, but I did decide that it was, I just needed a break. I couldn't come on here, record myself at a low point and then, post that to the internet and then feel like it was worthwhile or feel like it was valuable. So, instead, I was like, you know what? It's not gonna be the worst thing in the world to like take a break, and then I get to come back and talk about it, right? And get to talk about like the advocacy that I'm doing for myself, and then like the career itself, right? Because that's what it's about. And that's kind of what leads me into this conversation. So for the last week, so I'm on spring break right now, and I don't know when I'm gonna release this episode. I might release it like right after I'm done, to be real. But I'm on spring break right now, and I've had time to like kind of rest and recuperate and kind of reestablish kind of like where I'm at. And the past week I had spent like in class at grad school. So the program I'm in for counseling requires that you like go in to the school for a week at a time and do what they call labs. It's basically like this really like, for lack of a better word, like really intense week where you're basically practicing your skills as a counselor and then also allowing other people to practice their counseling skills on you. So there's a lot of vulnerability in what you're sharing, and then there's a lot of vulnerability in like the feedback you're getting in a very vulnerable space. So we spent 8 hours each day probably doing practice counseling and practice as a counselee, meaning like I'm getting counseled. So, it's just a lot, and a lot of stuff comes up. And I think going through that process is super essential. But it got me thinking about, at the end of the day, it's like, oh, I had this idea to like go and record for my podcast, but, I wasn't about to emotionally put myself up to that sort of scrutiny. So when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about for this week, I was like, what if I just talked about therapy in general? Because the whole part about counseling, right? The whole thing that I'm learning about like being a counselor and being even even someone in education, like the whole goal that we have is advocacy, right? Like the whole reason we get into education is for advocacy for the students in their own learning, and the whole reason we get into counseling in general is the sense of advocacy, right? And not only are we advocating for ourselves and for our profession and for students, but we're also advocating for counseling and therapy at large, right? And I said my profession, but I wanted to double down on that. And so today I wanted to dive into that capacity of saying like, hey, what does therapy look like? I want to destigmatize what that means for people because I still think, unfortunately, in the year of our Lord 2025, I think people still believe that like, oh, you go to therapy. Like it's weird the conversations I've had with mostly like older people, not to like generationalize this, but it's always like, oh, I didn't know you were in therapy. And it's like, yeah, like it's not something that we should be stigmatizing like that. So in the efforts of reaching the educational sphere with this, I wanted to talk about the tagline for the episode today that's just teachers need therapy. And there's a million reasons why. That was a really good clip for my TikTok, by the way. I'm not trying to purposely do that, but that was a good clip. Probably. Follow me on TikTok, you guys. It's something. And I guess the best place to start with this is like what therapy looks like, and I can do this as someone who's been in therapy and also as someone who's like practicing to be more involved in that profession. And the main goal, right, is literally just someone to recognize patterns, to validate and recognize your feelings and then to reflect them back to you, and also really just like giving you a safe place to exist in those feelings, right? I think a lot of us in certain capacities don't feel that we have the safety in our personal lives and our own spaces to explore what we're feeling, because oftentimes the people who are making us feel that way are in our lives and they don't really give us the space to go in and say like, oh, you're making me feel like this, because those are really hard conversations to have, especially with people you care about or people you are in close proximity with or people you work with. I think those conversations are not easy, and it takes a lot of work on a, relational level, like with another person, but it also takes a lot of work on like a personal level for you to even be comfortable recognizing and processing those feelings out loud. And that's what therapy is, right? Therapy counseling is all about, I'm going to go to this space, I'm going to talk to this person who is trained in recognizing patterns and recognizing emotions, and talk to them and have them give me their perspective on what they're seeing, right? And I do want to emphasize this thing, and generally this is true generally, like in, low level counseling, depending on what you're looking for, depending on, the orientation that your counselor has, depending on the levels of support you need, depending on any sort of diagnoses, depending on the level of education your provider has. There's a lot of different layers here, but I would say across the board the goal of general counseling, general therapy, is not to solve problems. It's to help you realize and grow your own strength in solving those problems. And this is for anyone, right? Like I tell students all the time, it's like, yeah, you should go to therapy, like it's good for you. The earlier you can start the better. I could not even fathom, I cannot even fathom the person that I would have been today if I would have started therapy when I was 12 years old. Like I'm being so for real. If I would have had that sort of support as a kid to like process all the things that were going on in my brain that like to this day I don't even know that I've had the space to process, I feel like it just would have made me like a better, more aware person in general. So this is for everyone, right? And like I was saying, it's not necessarily about problem solving. It's about helping you realize patterns and then helping you make your own choices in getting to that space, right? And recognizing how you're feeling about those certain choices. You can go to therapy and talk about the little T traumas, right? Or like the big stuff, the big traumas, and have the support in recognizing your own feelings about that so that you can make the steps to go and change, right? And I'm only going into like this basic level because again, like my whole goal here is to destigmatize it and then to connect it to education, right? So as far as recognition of stigma goes, I think therapy also is associated with this like, oh, I need to have like this big, this big T trauma to in order to go, right? And I do want to start off by saying that is 1000% not true. Every book that I've read and every counselor that I've talked to and everything that I've learned so far in my graduate program is literally like counseling is preventative work. It is proactive in the sense of the more you're able to do it, the more you're prepared for like all the things that life has to throw at you, right? And it does help you work through those like issues that have come up in your life. It does help you work through those big T traumas, but you do not need a trauma in order to need or receive therapy. Like that's just a total myth that I want to expel right away, right? Counseling is for people who want to live better lives, live more fulfilling lives, and strengthen the roles they already play in their own lives, right? So right off the bat, just to free the air of saying that like, oh, you need to like have been abused or have a diagnosis or you need to have some sort of prerequisite of trauma to get in. There's no check boxes when you're signing up for therapy that they will use to turn you away. Like that's literally just like not how it works. So with that kind of all set, I did want to kind of ease into this idea of why I believe that teachers need it, right? More specifically, not that they need it more or less than like the average person, but this is an education podcast. I usually, glean towards that side of things that says like, hey, I want to focus on teachers and what they need, right? Just judging from, if you've been listening to this podcast for the past 10 episodes, you can probably tell that I have experienced some things that clearly require some sort of third person pattern recognition and things. And I will get into like my personal journey with it towards the end of this podcast. This is going to be a shorter episode today. So, but I did want to talk about why teachers need it. Okay. First off, is teachers probably more so than they realize are under a lot of undue stress, right? I mean, think about the lesson plans you have to grade right now. Think about the burnout you feel. Think about the extra activities you're supposed to do during the day. Think about the kid that you're worried about right now. Think about the plans you have to make when you get back from the weekend. Think about the upcoming test taking that's going to happen. Think about the upcoming end of the year that's going to happen. And if I just didn't spike something in you and your heart rate didn't go up, then you're safe, you're clear, you're ready to go, right? But it's all those impending like stressors that to have someone in your life that you can like vent to that's not personally connected to you that can give you a sense of relief and like I said that recognition and validation in what you're feeling that is so immeasurably helpful to just go in and say like hey this is what happened this week and I need to talk about it because I just need to, right? I think there was a point with one of my older therapists that I had that I was able to go in and kind of have that relationship with, that rapport with, that said, like, he's like, hey, what's going on this week? And I was like, bro, you don't even know. And I would talk for 10, 15 minutes at a time straight. It's kind of like this podcast. I just kind of get on here and I'm like, you know what, guys? Here's what's going on today. So it's in that just daily levels of stress. And I think teachers, you guys have heard the adage of like they make like thousands and thousands of decisions every day, whether they're like giant decisions. Oh my God, whether they're giant decisions or not, teachers are making decisions every single day to the millionth degree probably at this point, right? And it's just that daily stress and having an outlet for that that helps immensely. If you don't have an outlet for those daily things, it's just going to pile up and up and up until you are burnt out, right? And further, I think having that space also allows you to recognize patterns in yourself that will alleviate some of that long-term pressure, right? I talked about burnout in one of my older episodes, and if you haven't watched it, I would go watch it. I talk about a lot of stuff, but it's good. And I talk about burnout, and I think recognizing that you are burnt out gives you the space and the time to cool a little bit, because if you have someone in your life that's actively, communicating with you about these issues that you're having and they're consistently telling you that, wow, that's okay. I also want you to recognize that like you're consistently feeling this way. And I think it'll help you proactively remedy some of those feelings that I think, like I said a long time ago, and I will say consistently, are very common in teachers, right? We have all these stressors and these pressures that add up and lead to burnout, and having someone there to like help you recognize where they are right? Like if it's always when you talk about your boss, or if it's always when you talk about your partner teacher, or if it's always when you're talking about a particular student, or when it's always when you're talking about lesson planning, like the job of your counselor and your therapist is to say, hey, I'm noticing that your feelings of stress are often emanating from group meetings at school, or I'm noticing you're feeling afraid of interacting with your principal. That one may or may not be personal. And their job is to then recognize that out to you and then for you to then sit with it and realize like, oh, what can I do there, right? And those daily pressures and stresses would be so much more alleviated by that capacity to share it with somebody. And I think that kind of encompasses everything that I wanted to talk about. No, I'm just kidding. I think I could talk about this for a long time. But there's also this sense of you need to fit into a certain crowd to a certain degree. Like you have to live up to this expectation, right? And I think a new generation of teachers in some capacity is moving away from this mentality. But at the end of the day, and I hate this, and I hate this phrase a lot because I'm working through my own thing with this, but like it is just a job, you know? And like I said, I kind of hate that phrase. I kind of hate that I used it, and I'm struggling with my own preconceptions of what that means. But at the end of the day, like it is just that, right? And are you going to let something that, even though it is this higher purpose, even though it is this more meaningful career, even though you are doing something that's bigger than yourself, that matters every single day, like I know all the things, right? Even though you are doing that, it should not cause you physical ailments. It should not cause you daily stress. You should not be stressed out every Sunday night when you're thinking about going back to school. Like it is fulfilling, so let it be fulfilling, you know? And teaching often doesn't get that rap because we're always wrapped up in we don't get paid enough. We have all these stresses. We have all these things. You know what would help with that? Hours and hours and hours of therapy. And it's just it helps you with those things, right? And we can talk about teaching about like the teaching trauma that comes along with it all, right? Whether it's secondary trauma from like a student experience that they're coming in and explaining to you in their journals in class, or they're coming in and you know sharing with you about what their home life is like, and you get like the secondary trauma from that. Or it's I've heard stories of kids being physically violent in school, right, with their teachers. And that's not even like the extreme stuff of like shootings and school shootings and things that are bigger systemic issues that also are in therapy. And I think there are a lot of traumas in that capacity that also could be worked through, right? Like the fact that even I not even I, but the fact that I wake up every single day and think about like, oh, what if today's the day that I don't lock my door the correct way, or that I, have to go through this situation with a student, or that our school's on the news because something bad happened, right? It's that systemic issue as well, right? That counseling is meant to help for. Like we are as counselors meant to advocate for the people, and then the people within the system, and then help them find ways to work within it, right? And help them advocate for themselves within it. So the fact that there are those systemic barriers, the fact that there are those cultural barriers, with your own students, the fact that there are things that seem so insurmountable and unchangeable, those are things that you can talk about, right? Like if you're consistently waking up worried about school shootings, and you're consistently waking up worried about a student that you have in class, and you're consistently waking up worried that you're not doing enough for the system to make it better, then let me tell you, like, you need therapy, and that's okay, right? And that's the thing that's not really touched on a lot is teachers would be so much better if they were supported in this capacity to one get that support that they need, right? And then one get that support that they need, and then two feel welcome and able to go and do those things and feel that it's valuable. And that's what this conversation is about, right? Like teachers need therapy is literally the title of this episode, because I just wanted to put it out into the universe regardless of who listens or who cares or whatever. I think that healthy teachers create healthy students, and happy teachers create happy students. And it's that sense of comfort and well being that if you have in yourself will transcend to your students, right? And, I'm sitting here and I'm sitting here realizing that, a lot of people that listen to this like know me as a person, right? And a lot of you that listen to this also don't really know me, but it's laughable in my own head to like come on here and talk about therapy and counseling and all these things that you need when it's something that I've actually struggled with for a really long time, just like that stress, that burnout. Even in previous episodes I've talked about those things, right? Like my own struggles with, conflicts at work and with my bosses and with my coworkers and, all the pressures that come with being a coach and a teacher and working and advocating for all your students, right? And so I can see how it sounds kind of hypocritical for me to get on here and then say like, "Hey, everyone needs to go to therapy." And then it's like looking at me where it's like, "Homie, look at yourself." Right? So, talking about like my own kind of experiences, I have talked about a lot of these things somewhere, whether I've written them down and posted them on the internet or whether I've made TikToks about it or whether there's a book written that has yet to be published that, discusses all of these things. They will be out there if they're not already, but this is also a forum for me to like begin doing that, okay? And that's why I started this in the first place. So, in my own journey, I started doing therapy in 2021. It was around March, so honestly, like 4 years ago, I think when I first started doing it. And the reason it took me so long, one, is because my frontal lobe wasn't developed. No, I'm just kidding. It's because like I kind of had that mentality too of, oh, I don't need this. Like there are people that need it more than me, and that thought in itself, I should have touched on before because there's no one that needs therapy more than somebody else, and that's comparing your levels of suffering. And you can't compare your levels of suffering because it's your lived experience, and you can't compare your lived experience with someone else's lived experience. Like that's just not a thing that needs to happen, not a thing that needs to exist. Nobody needs therapy more than somebody else. So my own toxicity in that, whatever led me to that thought kind of has always led me to believe like, no, you don't need that. Like someone else needs it way more. You can work on your shit on your own, right? And it was obviously around 2020, like a very big time for all of us, just given like the state of the world. My brother also passed away in August of 2020, and I think that got in my head a little bit. Not because we don't have to get into that actually. Just for the circumstances that surrounded his death was kind of something that kind of triggered it in me that like, hey, I don't want to end up in that similar situation. So I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, what if I like looked into this? And this was also coinciding with the time in my life where I had just gotten like a big surgery, like my job was changing and I like didn't know what was next, right? So I decided to get into it at a moment that clearly I needed it and clearly I would benefit from it. And it was finally a time in my life. I was what would that make me, 26 at the time, where I was finally okay with going in and saying like, hey, like I need help. And that was not an easy thing to like go and say, right? So it was 2021 in March, and I was meeting with her on Zoom for a while because, it was COVID and we had all these protocols. And I didn't super love that. It felt like really disconnecting for me to log into a Zoom screen and then like talk to somebody that I haven't ever met in person about like my feelings and like why I'm here and all these sorts of things, right? So right off the bat, I think trying it was a huge step for me, like personally, but trying it in that space in a way that wasn't super connective wasn't great. And there are some things that therapist did that I didn't super connect with. She made me do like what's parts work, and this works for a lot of people. It just did not work for me, where she kind of had me divide my life into like different parts. It was like the child part, the nurturer part, the worker part. There's different things. I have not learned about that yet in my program, so can sorry if that's wrong. And that didn't really connect with me. So I was with her for probably a 6-ish months, and then she moved back to like in-person stuff, and I went to her office a couple times. She had me do some like breathing exercises. We tried a little EMDR, which didn't super work with me for a bunch of reasons, just like how my brain works personally. And, I was kind of disconnected from that concept. So I stopped seeing her. And then at this point, I think I got back into it 2022. I went through a, a more corporate, for lack of a better word, counseling program through Psychology Today. I think I talked about Psychology Today before, actually. And, through Psychology Today, you can like look up therapists and counselors like in your area. And it's a really good place to like go. And sorry, my cat is like jumping around and I'm like about to sneeze. There's just like a lot going on at the moment. I was talking about psychologytoday.com. I talked about it before, but Psychology Today is basically a place where you can go and type in your area, your insurance, your needs, your preferences on a therapist, and it will narrow it down for you and give you a really good place to look as to like where to go. So that's a really good place to start if you're listening to this and like, damn, you're right. Like I need to go to therapy. And honestly, if BetterHelp is a place to start, start at BetterHelp. Again, this episode is no, I'm just kidding. It's not sponsored. Maybe someday. Um, that's a good place to start. So I had looked on there. I found like a more like corporate building that was like searching for the things that I needed and that matched the things that I needed. And I found a couple therapists. One I tried for a couple days, did not really super work out, wasn't vibing with her very much. And then I found this other guy, and I was actually like really opposed to like doing therapy with a man just because like my own my own biases. So I went into it and I was like, no, but I need to talk to somebody, and this is the only one that's like biting and having availability and all those things. So I went in like a year and a half later. I was like, okay, this is the one. Because I stuck around with it for a while. I met him in person, and then we started doing like virtual counseling. Like I would This is the really cool part about like my story that I wanted to tell, and that is something that does advocate for the importance of this profession. Is I would have my plan time in the afternoons when I was at my teaching job for the 2-ish years I was doing therapy with this counselor. And it was every Tuesday afternoon, and it was online because I was like, hey, I like can't leave my job. Like I have to be here. Like I have plan time in the afternoon. Can you make anything work? I would log on every day at 2, which was about seventh period where I worked, and I would log into a Zoom, and I would do therapy and I would do counseling at the school. And the way that I would literally put on my door and tell students is like, I'm unavailable from 2 to 3 because I'm in therapy. And yeah, students would like laugh at first. I would recognize that like students would like be like, Kassick's in therapy. And eventually it was like, no, he like can't answer, like Kassick's in therapy right now. And the way it became like a thing that people knew, right, that one, I was like actively seeking the help, and two, it like became okay that I was actively seeking the help. It was like a really cool experience to like see from the inside, right? And if you know anything about me as a teacher, it's like there were lots of kids like in and out of my room. So when I was able to put that in there and, you know, recognize and share the message that it's like, no, he can't right now. He's literally in therapy. And it was just a really cool like experience to be a part of that way. So that's like this other thing that eventually like it becomes okay to like go and do these things, right? So I did that for a couple years. Around that time as well, this I'm not going to get into. I'm going to make a whole other episode about this, but my work in therapy, right? Like my initial work to like go through this and to initially start was like kind of scary, right? Like being somebody who does not come from a place that the emotional aspects of your life are valued or recognized or validated in a lot of capacities. It was really challenging for me to like begin seeking the help for myself, right? Like it was not an easy first step. And taking that not easy first step allowed me to also take some other not easy first steps and look into more of getting like diagnoses for some things, because as I was in therapy, I was like, okay, wait, this isn't doing the things that I like want it to do or feel like I need it to do. Like I still feel as though there's like some disconnect here for me. And going through all those different options and realizing that it's like, okay, like I'm in therapy, but like there's still something in my brain that's like not working. Like I work with a bunch of students, and I recognize a lot of the similar things in them that match with like what I'm doing. So eventually, this was in 2023, so just over a year and a half ago at this point. It was November 2023. I decided to go and get an evaluation for autism and ADHD to kind of see like, kind of what was going on. And I would not have ever made that decision in my life to like go and spend the money, the time, take days off for myself to go and do this, to like better develop myself and who I am as a person, had I not taken the chance to like go to therapy in the first place. And it took me a couple tries to like get therapy correct, right? But just that process of going and choosing to take the time for myself, which is again why teachers need therapy, because when was the last time you as a teacher took the time to say like, I'm doing this for me and not for a student at my school? I'm gonna let that sink in for a little bit, because that hit me really hard a few years ago. And the fact that it's like, even at your profession, actively at your job, it's like, what was the last thing that I did for myself? Right. And I think that's like an important thing to do. So when I decided to go in and do these evaluations, like psychological evaluations with like active psychologists who are trained in diagnoses, I was eventually diagnosed with autism, and I think that was a big journey for me as well. They kind of changed my realm of like what I'm looking for in therapy and changed for like how I view the world and how I see it. And like I said, that never would have happened if it wasn't for my initial step into therapy. So I'm not saying that everyone's journey is going to look like that. I'm not saying that everyone needs to go and get evaluated for some sort of, neurodivergence. Like that is not the point here. The point here is that it's like the one step you take to maybe try to do something outside of your comfort zone is the thing that's going to start making a difference for you, right? And I think education needs more people that are willing to take that step forward because that allows for your students to then also take that step forward. And can you imagine the world we would live in if everyone decided to make steps forward for their own sake and for the betterment of themselves and the well-being of themselves? I think that is a beautiful place to start, right? And as teachers, we are like the trendsetters. We are the people who are actively influencing the future, right? Like that's why it's so hard sometimes to sit here and say that teaching is easy because it's not. It matters every single day, and we are the trendsetters. So if we begin trendsetting in the direction of self care and self advocacy and personal well being, like that's just going to make our students better. And then, the future is going to be so much better. I don't know where that philosophical thought came from, but I'm glad it happened. So at the end of this, right, I think I've gone through my journey enough in the fact of, you know, what I see as benefits for myself, what I see as benefits for the profession, and then just advocating for like, hey, it is scary. Like I'm validating the fact that it is a scary thing to like go and try to do and make time for. But the whole purpose of it is to give you some new perspective as to some things that you may not even be noticing about yourself. And the fact that there are 100,000% things that you are not noticing about yourself, even if you are a very self-aware person. Having someone sit across from you and tell you that you're frustrated, that you're afraid, that you're anxious, that you're nervous, that you are any other emotion in the dictionary. To have someone sit across from you and say that and then recognize the things that might be leading to those things, it is just the most powerful thing in the world to be a part of. And I hope that you take this as a sign to go and start that journey for yourselves. And with that, I didn't think I was going to talk for that long. That was 30 minutes already. Shoot. Um anyway, this episode is sponsored by just kidding. That joke is so bad. BetterHelp is a great place to start. Don't rely on it though, okay? Trust the process. Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else, you guys. um as we're winding down, I do want to remind you guys that I'm on all the socials, so please follow along for more. I have a lot of new ideas coming down the thing. I have a lot of things I'm working on, a lot of things I'm trying to put out there. So please follow along. Please leave a comment, leave a review, connect with me, slide into the DMs. They're wide open, as you know, if you're an avid listener. And I appreciate your time. I'm proud of you, and I will see you in the next one.